Man, that is one big stack of Burris Oracle X boxes. First, I sighted in at 20 yards, truing at 35 yards, 3 shots, same hole accuracy out to 45 yards. First shot hit center dot, second shot hit 8 inches low, the third shot missed the target. I reset the scope and started over, truing it all over again. The battery died. Changed the battery. I started truing it again at 35 yards, and 3 shots hit the same hole again, perfect accuracy. Second attempt to true it at 45 yards, 3 shots, same hole. Third truing at 60 yards, never would group again, back up to 35 yards. First shot low, 4 inches. Second shot high, 7 inches. Third shot missed the target. Can you believe that? Scope shut down, the battery, I guess, is dead again. I put on my original scope and I had same hole accuracy at 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and 3-inch group at 100 yards. That's the experience of a friend of Bunjie who reached out to me about the Burris Oracle X scope. Very similar experience to my own. Unfortunately, this is one of probably a dozen different friends of Bunjie who have reached out to me about the Burris Oracle X and problems that they have had. In this video, you will see ways to fix that scope and when it's time to send it back. Oh, and we're going to talk about how the company treats you. Is it a good company to deal with? For a whole season, I shot with this scope, killed a deer with it on state game lands using Bunjie 3.0, the Scorpid Deathstalker, the slick black Cadillac. Love this crossbow, and I love the combination with that Burris Oracle X scope on here. You'll notice there's not one on here because it died on me. A very similar experience to what our friend of Bunjie had. I ended up missing the target on a shot and said, that's it. There's something wrong with this scope. Put the old scope back on here, and when I say old scope, I mean old scope. It's an old Excalibur Twilight DLX. They don't even make them anymore. Put that scope on here and it's shooting perfect out to 60, right? Baseball size groups at 60 yards. I went through all the different things I'm going to discuss in this video, but what I want to tell you first and foremost is a little bit about my experience with the company, with Burris. Now, this scope died on me. As a backup, I actually bought a refurbished one from an online source. I'd shared that on our Facebook page. Bought one of those for, it was basically half price. It was $500. And I got this refurbished one and it wouldn't even fire up. So now, instead of having a backup and one that was not working, I had 2 scopes that didn't work, right? The only one that worked was on the OB. It was on the original Bunjie that's hanging on the wall behind me. That one still worked. But the one that had gone through an entire season with me was dying on me. And so I contacted the company, explained the problem to them, got an email back with a return authorization. They paid for the shipping. I packed it up. All I had to do was drop it off at a UPS center and it got shipped back to the company. Got notification when they received it. The original email said that they would be back with me in 5 to 6 weeks. However, within a week, determined that it was non-repairable and then just sent me a brand new one, which is in one of those boxes. Of those 5 boxes that I got down there, 2 of those are brand new scopes. 2 of those boxes are empty, and one of them is the box to this scope right here that was on the OB, that crossbow, and is now on the SWAT X1. This crossbow is really made for this scope. I've talked about that in other videos, and I really, really want it to work. I got it all set up on here. I've got the scope all set up. I've got the Bluetooth remote ready to go. Bam, right? We're ready to get out there and shoot some deer. So I'm very excited to use this combo this fall. But both those scopes were non-repairable, and I think what they meant by that was, even if there was something they can fix, they're just like, look, we're going to send you new scopes, we'll rotate these through our inventory and do something with them later down the road, sell them as refurbished ones if we fix them or whatever else. I don't really care. I got 2 brand new ones. We'll see if they work. I have not plugged them in yet. I haven't used them in the 60-yard backyard yet. I don't even know if I'm going to have time to do that before I go to Maryland. I might be taking the OB to go down there and stretch its legs with that original scope, and this might be the only crossbow I've got that's got the Burris on it. But Burris, the company, great to deal with. Said this before, I'd rather have something that works for a long time that doesn't break, but it's good to have a good company to deal with that gets very responsive. Now, if you got one of these scopes and all of a sudden it's a little wonky, right? It's not holding accuracy there in the backyard or whatever else. The first thing you want to do is go through and read the manual, right? And I hate to say this, but I don't read manuals. I don't. I don't care for reading that stuff. In this day and age, in 2023, when I'm making this video, do you read the manual for anything? I mean, I got that cell phone, doesn't come with a manual, or if it did, I didn't read it. It should do it all by itself, right? It should just work without reading the manual, without doing all that stuff. If there's a problem, if I need an answer to a question, I'll go to Google and figure it out. But for the most part, I don't want manuals. What's nice about the Burris is it comes with a very short pamphlet that's the manual, right? Full color, ooh, very nice. You can read this thing in 15 minutes and you'll know everything you need to know about the scope. The Burris is not the complicated version of these scopes. It's one of the reasons I went with Burris over the Garmin Zero X1 double I, whatever it is. This one's just a lot less complicated than that. When I saw the interface for that one, I thought that's way more than I want to get into. I went with a Burris because this, very simple, and you can go through this and understand it very easily if you read this. So, and I always have this with my arrows when I'm shooting in the backyard. If I have a question about the scope, I pull this out, make sure I'm doing it right, boom. The next thing that you want to do if you're having trouble with your Burris Oracle X, you want to check and make sure that it's on there tight. Now that goes for every scope. That's not just this scope, but this scope sits up pretty high. They have their own mount that goes on your Picatinny rail. You're going to want to start by going through and tightening these two again. Just make sure they're snug, right? You might want to do that every time you shoot. I don't know, but just keep an eye on those and make sure that they are tight. There's also, keep in mind, under here, there are some screws also, okay, up under here. Now you can't do those with it on. You might want to, before you mount your scope, make sure that those two screws are nice and tight. They're flat head screwdrivers, if I remember correctly. But just tighten those two. Make sure that they're tight. When you are adjusting your windage, you have to loosen this screw, which is a pain in the neck, especially on this crossbow because the barrel gets in the way. Loosen that screw, make your adjustment, and then tighten the screw back down before you take a shot. You have to loosen and tighten before every shot, okay? Same thing with the back screw. And I'm talking about those little Allen wrench screws that come with that. It comes with the wrenches, so that's not a problem. If you don't, the vibration of one shot is going to affect all of that and change all of that. It's going to undo everything you just did. Another thing that might troubleshoot some of your problems with truing. Now here I'm not talking about the 20 yards. These two screws here are just for the 20 yards. Make sure that you have 20 perfect. Spend a few arrows on 20 yards and make sure it's dialed in perfect at 20 yards. Once you've accomplished that and you're confident at 20 yards, now move out to like 35 and don't try and true all four. I was doing that off the bat, truing all four of them. The truth is, if you true it at two different yardages, like 35 and 50, you're going to be good out to like 70 yards, maybe farther. I think the way these things work, it is going to pick, based on your truing points, a trajectory that is already programmed into the scope. Think about that. It's not going to memorize the four different dots and have a trajectory that compensates all four of those dots if you true it at four different distances. Instead, it's going to pick a pre-programmed trajectory based on math, right, that meets as closely as possible those four truing points. If you put in 4 between 30 and 60 yards, I think you can confuse it, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure of that. Don't quote me on that. But you might find out, this is just something to try, if you're having problems, put in 2 truing points. Get it perfect at 20, a truing point at 35, truing point at 50, and see how it does at 80, right? I think that'll fix any problems that you're having. I think that will resolve them. And if you're going to be shooting at 100 yards, then you want another truing point at like 70 or something, maybe. 70 or 80 yards, maybe. I don't know, something like that. You don't necessarily need more than 2 truing points. The other little tip I'll give you if you're having problems with it, reset the scope. If you're starting over, don't try and change truing point number 2 and leave 1 alone. Don't do that. Just start over. I emailed Burris about that. They said it's totally okay to do it that way, but they recommend just starting over. If you've got a problem with your second truing point and it's not holding it, it probably has something to do with your first truing point because it's, again, I think, using a pre-programmed, and you guys correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I think it's using a pre-programmed algorithm or trajectory that's already in the software. If it's been confused by the second one, maybe it's forgetting the first one, I don't know. So just start over. It doesn't take that long. You put up 2 targets and shoot a few arrows. Now here's a really good one that if you're like me and you get, you're rushing it or whatever and you forget to pay attention to what you're doing, here's one to keep an eye out for. Make sure you are using the red dot at 35 yards. Got to put the crosshairs on the target to range it. Then push the button. Then you get a red dot. Then you got to move the crossbow to the red dot, right? You got to move the scope to the red dot. Yeah, you got a red dot on the screen, but you aim with the crosshairs, you're going to shoot under your target every time. And that is something that I did in the backyard. You just have to get in the habit of making sure that you are using the correct reticle, right? You're aiming correct. No different than any other scope, but it's so easy because you have to use the 20 to range. Get in the habit of doing it. And it's one of the reasons I don't like using multiple scopes. I like to have one scope. But once you get in the habit of doing that, it's okay. But when I first started, I was ranging it just fine. And then I'm shooting as though it's 20, but I'm really shooting at 40 yards. That arrow is going to get lost in the grass. So if you're missing a target, make sure you're using the right reticle, right? The right dot. Another little tip, once you've got 20 perfect, right? We're using the physical crosshairs in the scope for 20. Once you've got that all dialed in perfect with these two, the little Allen wrenches and all that good stuff. Once you've got that perfect, now you're moving out to 30, but don't use the Bluetooth remote. Range it with this until you're done truing. When you're out of the truing menu and just using the scope for fun or for hunting, then you use the Bluetooth. Until then, stick with this button. It says that in the manual. I don't know if that makes a difference. It probably shouldn't, probably doesn't make a difference, but it can't hurt. While you are truing the scope, stick with that fire button up here. One problem that our friend of Bunjie had that I have not had, thankfully, knock on wood, battery drain. I read over and over people having issues with their Burris Oracle X and battery drain. You put a new battery in it, working great, go to shoot it the next day, the battery's dead. That, to me, is totally unacceptable. My first Burris Oracle X, the one that broke and I sent back. It was the one that I had on the Scorpid, right? That was the first one that I had. The battery life was fantastic. It lasted all through the hunting season last year. That's the way it should be. It should last all season, or, I don't care if I got to replace a battery halfway through a season, but replacing it every week or so, that's unacceptable, right? Unless you're shooting an awful lot. You would have to be using it an awful lot. Some people have said, and they've gone back and forth with the company, and the company is telling them, well, it's searching for Bluetooth. And that's the reason it's running the battery down. That is totally unacceptable. Do not accept that from the company. If they tell me that, they're taking that scope back and they're giving me a brand new one because there's something wrong with that specimen. There's something wrong with that particular scope. It should not be doing that. The other one that I had on the OB that is now on the SWAT X1, I don't have any battery problem with. This is the original battery. I put it in there and it's been working since, I don't know, late last year or early this spring or whenever I got it. I can't remember all. I got too many of these things, right? They're getting all confused. But this battery, I haven't had a battery drain issue on that. If the new ones have battery drain issues, Burris is going to hear about it because that's unacceptable. Now, they're saying, well, it's searching for the Bluetooth remote, right? It's out there searching for that for 24 hours. So you have to take the battery out and you have to set the battery aside, and then when you go back to shoot, put the battery back in and screw that cap on. If I got to take the battery out every time when I'm done shooting it, you know what a pain that is to get this battery cap off and put it back on? If you've got one of these, you do know the answer to that question, don't you? Got a dowel rod from a friend of Bunjie, from One-Eyed Archer, friend of Bunjie, Jim, gave me a dowel rod that I can use to sort of finagle that cap back on there, and it doesn't make it seamless, but it sure makes it a lot better. The threads are really fine, and it doesn't want to go in there, and it wants to go in cockeyed every time. You just want to wad it up and pretty bad when the dowel rod is the only thing that works on your scope. So if these new scopes require me to put that stupid cap on every time, I ain't doing that. I don't have to do that with my phone. I'm not running the battery dead looking for the Bluetooth on my truck. So don't give me that. That's not the case. Plus, these scopes time out after 30 minutes or so. It just shuts off, right? And you have to wake it back up by pushing this button and turn it on. If it's turned off, but still looking for Bluetooth, that is either a really crappy design issue or there's some kind of leakage going on with a circuit somewhere in the scope. And I think it's the latter. If it was a design issue, then it would be present on every one of them. And it's not. So if you got a dud, it's a dud. And tell them about it. That's my opinion, right? I don't work for Burris. I am struggling to enjoy their scope. And I love it and I want it to work. And I love what it can do when it works. So there. If your crossbow is not holding accuracy with your Burris Oracle X, make sure you got the proper cheek rest. This one didn't need an extra cheek piece, but most crossbows are going to need some kind of elevated rest here. You can use some pipe insulation if you, in a pinch, if you had to. You can get on Gotta Grip, right, and use one of those. Get one that's custom. Mike from Gotta Grip helped me custom fit one, so maybe he'll do the same for you. But you got to make sure that you have the proper cheek weld. You got to make sure you got the right eye relief, all that good stuff. And it doesn't hurt, especially at those longer distances, to have a good rest. Use a Bog Death Grip or some other sort of field pod. If you have a bench to shoot off of, you can get a bag in the back, put a bipod on the front or something like that. In this crossbow, you can use a stirrup for a bipod on the front and shoot off a rest, something like that. But make sure you're holding the crossbow steady and it's not you. There's all the other accuracy issues that go into shooting a crossbow. It could be your arrows at distance. It could be a lot of different things. So look at the other videos I've done on the topic. If it comes down to it and it's the scope, let Burris know, and I'll tell you, they are a good company to deal with. So my hat goes off to them. It was a very pleasurable experience getting the 2 new scopes. So I just hope they work. Stay tuned for more Death by Bunjie action with this little guy right here. And we'll find out what the name of this crossbow is too. Until then, all hail Bunjie.